My daughter was 7 years old when she saved my life. Not with medicine, not with a miracle, with 5 words. 5 words she whispered into my ear on the morning of her own birthday, while I was sitting on the edge of her bed in the back room of a house I had been paying for and never once been invited to question. My name is Selena Marsh. I am 33 years old. And for 7 years, I trusted the one person on this earth I believed would never betray me, my mother. I sent her $40,000 every single year to care for my daughter Emma while I worked across the country and tried to rebuild a life that had been shattered when my husband died. I believed every cent was going toward the childhood my daughter deserved: warm food, good clothes, a safe room, a loving home. But on the morning of Emma's 7th birthday, when my little girl put both of her small hands on my face, looked me directly in the eyes, and whispered 5 words, I realized I had been pouring my grief and my labor and my trust into a lie so deep and so carefully constructed that I nearly lost my daughter forever. The money was not feeding Emma. Emma had been sleeping on a worn-out cot in a drafty back room while my mother wore designer coats and drove a car that cost more than I made in a year. And my mother had already filed legal paperwork to make sure I would never get Emma back. This is what happened. And this is how I made sure justice was the last word. The morning Derek died, I was learning how to be a mother. 4 months in, still figuring out the weight of it. Then 2 men knocked on the door and the weight became something different entirely. Derek Marsh died on a Wednesday morning in October, when Emma was barely 4 months old. He was a structural welder. He had been working at a commercial construction site 30 miles from our apartment when a piece of equipment failed without warning. He was 28. He had placed his wedding ring on his finger 18 months before and had kissed me goodbye that morning at 6:15. Careful not to wake Emma, and had whispered he would bring home pizza because I had been too exhausted to cook. He never came home. 2 men in gray jackets arrived at our door at 4:47 in the afternoon. I know the exact time because Emma had just started crying in her crib, and I was walking to get her when the knock came. I stood in the hallway with Emma crying, the knock getting louder, and something in my chest went completely, unnaturally still. I opened the door. I do not remember everything they said. I remember the words, accident and immediate, and I am so sorry. I remember sliding down the doorframe with Emma still in my arms. I remember her going quiet, like she understood. I remember the cold air coming in from the open door and not being able to move to close it. Derek had a life insurance policy through his employer. It paid out $120,000. That number sounds like a lot until you are sitting on the floor of a 2-bedroom apartment holding a 4-month-old, in a city where you have no family, no childcare, no income, and a grief so heavy you cannot lift your arms. I was 25. I had a marketing degree I had never fully used. I had been working part-time at a design agency before Emma was born. I now had $120,000, a baby, and no plan. My mother, Patricia, drove up from her home in Cloverdale 3 days after the funeral. She stayed for a week. She helped me sort through Derek's things. She sat with me in the evenings after Emma went to sleep, and she let me cry without saying anything, which at the time felt like the most loving thing a person could do. On her last night before she drove back, she sat across from me at the kitchen table and made an offer. She said she would take Emma. Not permanently, she was careful to say. Just for a year, maybe 2, while I got back on my feet. She said Emma needed stability and I needed to heal, and that trying to do both at the same time alone would break me. I said no 3 times. She kept talking. She talked about Derek. She said what would he have wanted for Emma. She talked about her big yard and her retired schedule and her steady, capable hands. She made it sound logical, practical, like it was simply the most sensible arrangement for everyone involved. On the 4th time she asked, I said yes. I told myself it was temporary. 12 months, maybe 18. I told myself I would have Emma back before she could walk steadily or form full sentences. I told myself my mother was the safest place my daughter could possibly be. I was wrong on every single count. The day I handed Emma over, I stood in the driveway and watched my mother buckle her into the car seat. Emma was reaching her small arms back toward me and making the specific sound she made when she wanted to be picked up. That sound. I still hear it sometimes, late at night. I stood on the sidewalk with my arms crossed because I knew if I reached back, I would never stop. My mother reversed out of the driveway. Emma's face disappeared behind the car window. I went inside. I sat in the rocking chair in the nursery and I made a promise to my daughter out loud to the empty room. I told her I would be ready in a year. It would take 7 years to understand the true cost of that promise, and by the time I understood, my mother had already started spending every cent of it. For the first year, everything appeared fine. My mother sent pictures. Emma looked happy. I told myself the ache was normal. Then came a video call that left a question I could not put away. In the first year, everything seemed fine. My mother sent photographs regularly. Emma in the backyard, Emma at the park, Emma grinning with applesauce smeared across her chin. I clung to those pictures on the nights the apartment felt like a cave. I threw myself into work. I took the full-time position at the design agency. Within 8 months, I had been promoted. I started freelancing on the side, sometimes working until 2 in the morning. I sent the first $40,000 to my mother's account when Emma was 14 months old. My mother had prepared a careful breakdown of monthly expenses: formula, food, clothing for a growing baby, pediatric appointments, utility bills that she said had tripled since Emma arrived, childcare on the days she had her own appointments. She sent it to me in a spreadsheet with neat rows and tidy totals. I reviewed it once. I approved it. I told myself this was responsible parenting under difficult circumstances. I called Emma every evening that year. She was too young for real conversation, but she would reach toward the screen with her whole body, and my mother would say, "She absolutely knows your voice. She lights up every time." I believed it. I needed to believe it. It was in Emma's second year, when she began forming words, that the first small wrongness appeared. It was a Tuesday evening video call. Emma was sitting in a chair eating from a bowl. She looked thin, not dramatically, not thin in a way that would make a stranger call anyone, but thin in a specific way that made something in my stomach pull tight. I asked what she had eaten that day. My mother listed a full balanced menu without any hesitation: oatmeal, eggs, a banana, pasta with vegetables. I said she looks a little thin. My mother said, "She takes after Derek's side. They're all lean." I let it go. But it stayed with me. The second wrongness came 6 months later. I asked my mother to describe Emma's bedroom. She began describing it, and somewhere in the middle I realized she was describing the room exactly as it had looked when Emma was 8 months old. Same pale yellow walls, same butterfly mobile. But Emma was now 2.5, a child who ran and climbed and pulled things off of shelves. A room does not stay the same for 2 years with a toddler in it. When I asked directly if anything in the room had been updated, my mother paused. Just one beat. Just long enough. She said no, Emma loves it exactly as it is. I sent extra money the following week. An additional $800. I asked my mother to update the room and send me pictures. She sent pictures of a beautifully decorated child's room, colorful walls, new bookshelf, fresh curtains. I felt relieved. I did not find out until years later that those pictures had been taken from a home decor website, that the room Emma was actually sleeping in had not changed. Not in 2 years, not in 5. That the same worn blanket was on the same cot in the same back room from the very first week my mother brought her home. I did not know because I chose to trust, and because my mother had spent a lifetime learning exactly how much reassurance it took to make a person stop asking questions. By year 3, I was saving harder than ever. I told myself 2 more years and I would have enough to buy something small and bring Emma home and start over. What I did not know was that by year 3, my mother had begun funneling my money towards something that had nothing to do with my daughter. And the man I had caught a glimpse of in the background of a video call, a man Emma had referred to so casually it was clear she had known him for some time, was not a neighbor. He was not a relative. He was a man with a history. And that history was about to become my problem. His name came out of my daughter's mouth the way children say things they have been saying every single day, like it was ordinary, like I was the only one who did not already know. His name, I eventually learned, was Raymond Carr. But when I first glimpsed him, he was just a figure moving through the background of a video call on a Saturday afternoon in late spring. Emma was 4 years old. She was sitting at the kitchen table with a coloring book. My mother was somewhere off screen. Then a man walked across the kitchen behind Emma without looking at the camera and disappeared into the hallway. I asked Emma who that was. Emma did not look up from her coloring book. She said, "That is Raymond." The word landed in my chest like a stone dropped into still water. I asked if Raymond visited a lot. She said, "He lives here." I asked when he moved in. She looked up then, finally, with the completely matter-of-fact expression only a 4-year-old can produce. She said, "Before my birthday." Her birthday had been 4 months ago. I ended the call and dialed my mother's cell immediately. She answered on the second ring, relaxed and unhurried, as if I had called to discuss something completely ordinary. I told her I had just seen a man in her house. I told her Emma had said his name was Raymond and that he lived there. I asked why she had not told me. There was a brief silence. Then my mother laughed, not nervously, comfortably, as if I were being slightly unreasonable. She said Raymond was a good man, a friend, and she had been spending time with him for a while. She said he was wonderful with Emma. She said she had been meaning to tell me and had simply been waiting for the right moment. I asked what a while meant. She said about 8 months. 8 months. A man I had never heard of had been living under the same roof as my 4-year-old daughter for 8 months, and my mother had decided I did not need to know. I asked for a video call. I said I wanted to meet him. Next weekend, I said. My mother agreed without hesitation. Too easily. The call never happened. Every weekend for the following 3 weeks there was a reason. Emma was not feeling well. The internet was down. My mother had a commitment at church. By the time a video call finally occurred, Raymond was neither visible nor mentioned, and my mother had reframed the situation so skillfully that I walked away from the call feeling as though I had overreacted. That was one of my mother's greatest skills. She could make you feel guilty for accurately seeing what was directly in front of you. In the months that followed, Emma's calls grew shorter. She answered questions in single words. When I asked if she was happy, she said yes, but without the immediate openness a child usually has when the answer is genuine. There was a pause before it. Small, but I noticed every time. One evening when Emma was 5, she said something I replayed in my mind for weeks. I had asked what she ate for dinner and she said cereal. Just cereal. I asked what kind, and she said the plain kind, and then very quietly, almost to herself, she said, "We have cereal a lot now." I texted my mother that night. My mother replied with a detailed paragraph about a nutritionist she had consulted, about Emma going through a phase with simple foods, about how children could be inexplicably picky at that age. She attached a grocery receipt as evidence. The receipt totaled $67 for the week, for a woman and a growing 5-year-old. And Raymond. I stared at that number for a long time. Then I opened my bank app and looked at the $40,000 transfer I had sent 3 months prior. $67, $40,000, same household, same calendar year. Something inside me shifted that night. Some last thread of comfortable assumption snapped cleanly in two. I had been asking the wrong questions. I had been watching for the wrong signs. I had been trusting a story, and I was finally, slowly, beginning to read what was actually written beneath it. I drove 9 hours to be at Emma's 7th birthday. I told my mother I was coming in the afternoon. What I did not tell her was that I was already parked 2 streets away at 6 in the morning, watching her house. Emma turned 7 on a Saturday in March. I had left the night before, driving through the dark with the kind of focus that comes not from adrenaline, but from a decision that has finally been made after being put off for too long. I arrived in Cloverdale before sunrise and parked in a lot 2 streets from my mother's house. I waited. Some part of me was still hoping for a simple explanation. Maybe the grocery receipt was an isolated bad week. Maybe the room in the background of the video calls was simply one room, and Emma's actual room was different. I had been carrying these doubts for 2 years, and every time I brought them too close to the surface, my mother had the exact right words to push them back down. But something had changed on the drive over. Some locked door in my chest had finally opened, and what was behind it was not grief. It was not guilt. It was cold, direct clarity. At 7:30 in the morning, I drove slowly past the house. My mother's old sedan was gone. In the driveway sat a dark blue SUV I had never seen before. New, clean, expensive in a way that did not match the woman who had been telling me for 7 years that $40,000 was barely enough. I parked around the corner and sat for 40 minutes. Then the dark blue SUV reversed out of the driveway and drove in the opposite direction. I waited 20 more minutes. Then I knocked on the door. My mother opened it in her robe with coffee in her hand. The look on her face when she saw me was not surprise. It was something more controlled than surprise. She recovered in under a second. She smiled. She said she thought I was coming in the afternoon. I said I made a good time. She stepped aside to let me in. The house was neat. Nicer than I remembered. A new couch in the living room. New curtains. The kitchen had been recently repainted. I absorbed all of it in 90 seconds. I asked where Emma was. My mother said she was still sleeping. Birthday girls get to sleep in. I walked to the back of the house. I pushed the door open. The room was small. There was a single cot against the far wall with a thin mattress and a blanket washed so many times the pattern had nearly vanished. A plastic storage bin in the corner served as a dresser. The curtain rod held a bath towel in place of an actual curtain. Emma was curled on the cot facing the wall, her knees pulled up to her chest. I sat on the edge of the cot and placed my hand on her back. She woke slowly the way children do, and then she turned over and saw my face, and in the half second after that, she was sitting upright with her arms around my neck, and her face pressed into my shoulder, and she was crying. Not the sharp, demanding cry of a child who wants something, the quiet, deep crying of a child who has been waiting a very long time. We sat like that without moving. When she finally pulled back and looked at me, she put both of her small hands on my cheeks and looked directly into my eyes with those dark, serious eyes that had always been her father's eyes, and she whispered 5 words. "Mama, she spends your money." I did not move. I asked her quietly, as calmly as I could manage, what she meant. Emma glanced at the door, then back at me, and she said, "Raymond's car. That is your money. Grandma said so." I heard her. I kissed Emma on the forehead. I told her I loved her more than anything in the world. I told her to go eat breakfast. Then I walked back into my mother's kitchen and looked at the woman I had trusted with everything. And for the first time in 7 years, I did not see my mother. I saw exactly what she was. And I started planning from that moment forward. I did not confront her that morning. I did something far more dangerous. I went home, I opened a spreadsheet, and I started following the money. I did not confront my mother at the birthday party. I know that surprises people. Every instinct I had was telling me to drop every question I had been holding for 2 years directly onto that kitchen table while Emma was in the next room eating cereal. But I had known my mother long enough to know exactly what would happen if I did that. She would explain. She would reframe. She would locate the softest possible version of every uncomfortable fact and deliver it with such quiet authority that I would leave that house doubting everything Emma had whispered and doubting myself for believing a 7-year-old over her grandmother. My mother did not crack under direct confrontation. She dissolved it. So I sat at her table. I ate birthday cake. I watched Emma blow out 7 candles. And while my mother was at the kitchen sink washing dishes, I quietly photographed every corner of that house with my phone. Emma in her too small sweater, the plastic storage bin that served as her dresser, the towel on the curtain rod, the refrigerator when my mother stepped outside to check the mailbox, 3 items inside, a half-empty jar of peanut butter, a container of off-brand orange juice, 1 single egg. I drove home the next morning. I did not sleep for 2 days. On the 3rd day, I opened a spreadsheet and started reconstructing 7 years line by line, $40,000 per year, $280,000 total. I went through every bank transfer with a precision I had never applied to anything in my life. Then I cross-referenced my mother's address on county property records. What I found stopped me cold. She had moved. Not to a smaller house as she had told me 2 years earlier when she requested extra money to cover an increased mortgage. She had moved to a newer, larger property in a better part of Cloverdale. A house valued at $310,000. I searched Raymond Carr. He had 2 prior convictions, one for fraud, one for check forgery, both over a decade old, both from a state 2 hours away. I searched my mother and Raymond Carr together on county property records. They had purchased the house jointly, 8 months ago. The same month the dark blue SUV appeared in the driveway. I sat back in my chair and let that land. My mother, who had no independent income beyond a modest pension, and a man with a fraud conviction, had purchased a $310,000 home together. 8 months ago, the same year I had sent her $40,000. Then I pulled the county court records. And what I found there made my hands go cold in a way that the photographs and the property records had not. 6 weeks ago, my mother had filed a petition for permanent legal guardianship of Emma. Not temporary, not emergency, permanent. The filing described me, the child's biological mother, as absent and uninvolved in the child's daily life for the majority of the child's life. It described my mother as the sole consistent caregiver. It stated that reunification with the biological mother would be disruptive and potentially harmful to the child. It requested the transfer of all parental decision-making rights to my mother, permanently and irrevocably. I read the document 3 times from beginning to end. Every sentence had been constructed to erase me. No father. A mother reduced to a wire transfer. A grandmother who had spent 7 years quietly rewriting herself as Emma's real parent in the spaces between my calls and visits. And the financial logic was not subtle once I saw it clearly. Courts routinely ordered biological parents to pay child support to legal guardians. Once that guardianship was granted, my $40,000 a year would no longer be a voluntary act of love. It would be a court order, permanent, legally enforceable. Impossible to stop without a legal fight I might not be able to win. My mother had not just stolen my money for 7 years. She had been building a machine designed to steal my daughter, a machine that would legally cement her control and keep the money flowing indefinitely. And she had nearly finished building it. The next move was mine, and I was not going to waste it. I hired a private investigator. Not because I was dramatic, because I needed numbers that could not be argued with in a courtroom. What Joan came back with was worse than anything I had imagined. I hired a private investigator named Joan. Not flashy, not expensive in the cinematic sense. She wore sensible shoes, carried a thermos of coffee, and had spent 22 years following financial trails for divorce attorneys. When I sat across from her and explained what I had found so far, she listened without expression, took notes without comment, and told me to give her 3 weeks. 3 weeks later, she sat across from me again with a bound report and a spreadsheet and walked me through it page by page. I had to stop her twice to compose myself. Year 1. $40,000 sent, approximately $12,000 directed toward actual child-related expenses. Clothing, food, pediatric appointments, childcare. The remaining $28,000 was absorbed into my mother's personal accounts and used for home renovations, a vacation to a coastal resort, and credit card payments tied to Raymond. Payments for a man who, contrary to my mother's claim of 8 months, had entered her life 4 years earlier through an online platform she had never once mentioned to me. Year 2. $40,000. $11,000 toward Emma. The rest toward a new vehicle. My mother had told me the year before that her car was unreliable and needed replacing. I had added the cost to my transfer without a single question. Year 3. $40,000. Less than $9,000 toward Emma. The remainder went toward a personal loan my mother had co-signed with Raymond, a loan secured, essentially, against the certainty of a steady annual transfer from a daughter who would never audit her. Joan laid the spreadsheet flat between us, and I looked at 7 years of my labor reduced to a column of numbers. My daughter had been living on approximately 20 to 22 cents of every dollar I sent. The remaining 78 cents had funded a life I was never permitted to see. The dark blue SUV in the driveway, $34,000. My mother's designer coat, the one she had been wearing when she opened the door on Emma's birthday morning. A brand I had admired online but never been able to afford. The house they purchased together, partly funded by a lump sum withdrawal from savings accumulated directly from my annual transfers over the preceding 4 years. Raymond's role was not passive. Joan had obtained records showing that Raymond had introduced my mother to what he had, with appalling casualness, referred to as cooperative household funding. He had run this same arrangement with at least 2 other women before my mother. One of those women had filed a civil complaint that was later dropped, presumably because she could not sustain the legal cost of pursuing it. I want to be precise about something, because it would have been easier if it were otherwise. My mother was not a naive woman being manipulated by a predator. The evidence did not show that. My mother had been a willing, active, calculated participant from the beginning. She had made the phone calls. She had constructed the spreadsheets. She had sent me photographs of a children's room pulled from a website. She had described Emma as thriving for 7 straight years, while my daughter ate cereal and slept under a faded blanket on a cot. She had looked at my face on every video call and she had lied, without pause, without guilt, without a single moment of visible hesitation, and the guardianship petition was the logical conclusion of everything she had been constructing. Once granted, she would hold legal authority over Emma, a legally enforceable claim to my financial support, and the public narrative of the devoted grandmother who stepped up when a grieving young mother could not cope. She had planned every layer of it. She had made one mistake. She had let Emma hear her. I sat with everything Joan had given me for 24 hours. I did not call anyone. I did not cry. I sat at my kitchen table in the dark, and I let the full shape of it settle into me. Then I picked up the phone and called the most formidable family law attorney in the state. Her name was Margaret Cole. She had not lost a custody case in 4 years. And when I slid Joan's report across her desk and she looked up at me over her reading glasses, she said 4 words. "We are going to bury this." Margaret Cole was not warm. She was precise. And precision, I was learning, was the only currency that mattered in a courtroom. Margaret Cole did not hold your hand. She did not offer comfort or reassurance or the gentle language that makes a terrible situation feel manageable. She looked at a case the way a surgeon looks at a body before the first incision, methodically, without sentiment, completely focused on what needed to be cut. Our first meeting lasted 4 hours. She reviewed Joan's full report. She reviewed every bank transfer record I had compiled going back to year 1. She reviewed the county property records, the guardianship petition, and the background information on Raymond Carr. She asked questions with the clipped efficiency of someone who has heard every variation of betrayal and has long since stopped being surprised by the human capacity for it. At the end of the meeting, she laid out a 4-part strategy. First, file an emergency counter motion to the guardianship petition before it advanced further. The motion would challenge my mother's characterization of me as absent and uninvolved, and present documented proof of 7 years of financial support, regular communication, and continuous expressed intent to reunify. Second, request an independent welfare assessment of Emma from the court. If a guardian ad litem was appointed to evaluate Emma's living situation, the cot and the storage bin, and the insufficient food supply and the financial discrepancy between what I sent and what Emma actually received would become part of the official court record. My mother would no longer control the narrative. Third, formally document Raymond Carr's presence in the household and his prior criminal history in the context of a minor child's welfare. Fourth, build a parallel civil case. What my mother had done was not an accounting error. It was documented misappropriation of funds explicitly designated for a child's care. Margaret had a colleague in civil litigation who specialized in exactly this category of case. I listened to all 4 parts. I said yes to all of them before she had finished the last sentence. Margaret said, "You understand this will take time and it will not be comfortable." I told her I had been waiting 7 years. Time was not the issue. What I did not say, because I had not quite admitted it to myself yet, was that I was scared, not of losing the case. By the 3rd hour of that meeting, I had moved past fear of losing. What frightened me was Emma. Emma was 7 years old. She had spent her entire life in that house with my mother. She had been told a version of me for 7 years by the one adult she trusted above everyone. I did not know what that version looked like. I did not know whether she had been told I was too busy, or that I had chosen work, or something harder than either of those. I found out that I had visitation rights that my mother had never moved to formally restrict, because doing so would have alerted me to the guardianship proceedings too early. So I drove to Emma's school. I signed in at the front office. I waited in the hallway at the end of the lunch period. Emma came around the corner with a group of girls, backpack on, her hair in a ponytail that had come slightly loose on one side, the way a ponytail looks when no one checked it carefully that morning. She saw me and she stopped. Her friends kept walking. She stood in the middle of the hallway, completely still. I crouched down to her level. She ran. She crossed the distance between us in 3 steps and held on with both arms, and I held her back with everything I had. I made her the same promise I had made 7 years ago to an empty nursery, except this time I made it directly into her ear, quietly and clearly, so that no version of it could be retold to her differently afterward. I told her I was coming for her. I meant it in every possible way. The case was ready. The evidence was assembled. The attorneys were in position. My mother had spent 7 years building something she believed was impenetrable. She had never met Margaret Cole. The court sent an independent evaluator to my mother's house without notice. My mother had been certain she would have advance warning. She had been wrong about that too. The independent welfare assessment was conducted by Dr. Simone Atwater. She arrived at my mother's home on a Tuesday morning unannounced, accompanied by a child welfare officer. Standard procedure for contested guardianship matters. My mother, I learned afterward, had been operating under the assumption she would receive at minimum 72 hours' notice. The court had not been required to provide that. It had not. Dr. Atwater's report was filed 11 days later. I read it 3 times the morning Margaret sent it over. The report documented Emma's living space, the cot, the plastic storage bin, the absence of age-appropriate books, toys, or educational materials in the room Emma had been occupying for 7 years. It noted that the child appeared underweight relative to her age and height. It noted that when asked to describe a typical dinner, Emma had responded without any apparent distress, but with the kind of matter-of-fact evenness that a child develops when a difficult reality has simply become normal. The meals she described fell significantly below the recommended nutritional standards for a child her age. The report also noted the presence of a male resident in the household, identified by my mother as a domestic partner, whose background the evaluator had flagged for further review in the context of minor child welfare. The final section of the report addressed Emma's relationship with her biological mother. Dr. Atwater had asked Emma about me directly. Emma said, "Mama calls me every night. She says she is coming to get me. Grandma says she is too busy, but Mama says she is not busy. She is just saving." My mother had told my 7-year-old daughter that I was too busy. 7 years of nightly phone calls, 7 years of $40,000 transfers with Emma's name in the memo line, 7 years of Emma reaching toward a phone screen in the evenings, and my mother standing just outside the frame, quietly, consistently, deliberately, feeding my child a different story about who her mother was. Too busy. I set the report on the desk and walked to the window and stood there for a long time without moving. Then I went back to work. The civil case Paul Nguyen had been building alongside the family court proceedings was reaching its own point of culmination. The subpoenas had come back. Bank records, joint account records, property documentation, cash withdrawal histories. The picture they confirmed was detailed and complete. My mother had received $280,000 in transfers, explicitly labeled in every single memo line as Emma Care and Support. She had directed less than $50,000 of that toward Emma over 7 years. The remainder had moved through a combination of personal accounts, joint accounts, and cash withdrawals that aligned directly with Raymond's documented habits. Raymond Carr, Joan had found, was a regular presence at a casino 2 hours outside of Cloverdale. His visits aligned neatly with the cash withdrawal dates from my mother's account in the weeks following my annual transfers. My money, Emma's money, on a casino floor. The guardianship petition was not an act of love, it was the infrastructure of a permanent extraction. A court-ordered child support arrangement is harder to stop than a voluntary transfer. It creates a legal obligation, it designates a financial dependent and a financial provider, and it builds walls around both. My mother had been constructing those walls for years. The guardianship petition was the last wall, the one that locked everything permanently in place. She had calculated every piece of it, and she had made one error. She had done all of this around a child who paid attention, a 7-year-old who heard things she was not supposed to hear and held them carefully and waited for the right person to tell them to. Emma had not crumbled under 7 years of that house. She had paid attention. She had remembered. And on her birthday morning, she had put both hands on her mother's face and told her exactly what she needed to know. The trap was laid. The evidence was in position. My mother had filed her petition weeks ago and was waiting for a routine hearing date. She was about to walk into a courtroom she had not prepared for. The hearing was on a Thursday in June. My mother arrived composed. She sat down, adjusted her gray dress, and looked at her attorney instead of me. She had no idea what was about to be entered into the record. My mother arrived at the courthouse 4 months after I had found Emma on that cot. She wore a gray dress I did not recognize. Raymond sat in the row directly behind the defense table, present in a way that I suspected was intended to project stability and normalcy. My mother's new attorney sat beside her, someone polished and prepared, someone she had clearly paid well for. She did not look at me when she entered the room. She spoke quietly to her attorney and appeared, from the 20 feet between us, completely calm. I had spent 7 years watching her be completely calm. I was no longer impressed by it. Margaret Cole stood up. She filed into the record the complete financial documentation. Every bank transfer, every memo line, Jones' cross-referenced analysis, the bank subpoenas, the property purchase records, Raymond's background and documented financial activity. The chronological relationship between the guardianship petition and my 7 years of continuous financial and communicative involvement with Emma. My mother's attorney objected to the financial records on grounds of relevance. Margaret addressed the objection in 45 seconds. Judge Elaine Ruiz, a compact woman with a courtroom manner that suggested she had no patience for delay, overruled it. Margaret then entered Dr. Atwater's welfare assessment into the record. The room was quiet when Judge Ruiz read the section describing Emma's bedroom. Then Margaret played the audio recording. I had not known the recording existed until 3 weeks before the hearing. Emma's school counselor had been quietly concerned about Emma for several months prior to the case. She had begun keeping observational notes and had eventually conducted a routine check-in session with Emma, recorded with full parental consent, which I had provided after Margaret called to explain what the counselor had found. In the recording, Emma spoke the way children speak when they trust an adult and are not performing. Unhurried, direct. She described serial dinners. She described the cold in the back room during winter. She described lying awake and hearing my mother and Raymond arguing about money after they thought she was asleep. And then she described, in the same quiet voice, the night she had heard my mother on the phone telling someone, "Selena does not need to know the specifics. She never comes to check anyway. She never comes to check anyway." The room was completely still when the recording ended. My mother's attorney immediately requested to approach the bench. There was a brief conference. Judge Ruiz denied the motion to suppress and entered the recording into evidence. I watched my mother during all of this. She held her composure. But I had watched her hold composure for 33 years, and I knew the precise signs of its edges. Her jaw tightened at specific moments. Her hands folded and unfolded on the table 3 separate times. When Raymond leaned forward from the row behind her to whisper something, she did not turn her head. Judge Ruiz ruled that afternoon. The guardianship petition was denied with prejudice. My mother could not refile it. Emma was to be returned to my full custody within 30 days. The financial records were forwarded to appropriate civil and regulatory authorities as a referral for further action. Raymond Carr was mentioned by name in the ruling in a way that would be difficult to distance himself from. The civil case Paul Nguyen had been building produced a judgment 9 months later, requiring my mother to repay $187,000, the documented and traceable portion of the misappropriated funds. She sold the house to satisfy the judgment. The dark blue SUV was repossessed as part of the settlement. Raymond was gone before the house sold. My mother called me twice after the civil judgment. I did not answer. Emma moved into our apartment on a Friday evening in July. 2 bags, a stuffed bear she had named Captain. She stood in the doorway of her new room, her actual room, and looked at me and said, "Is this actually mine?" I said yes. She walked in and sat on the edge of the bed and bounced once, testing it, and then looked up at me and smiled. And for the first time in 7 years, I stopped thinking about everything it had cost to get here. I stopped adding it up. I stopped replaying the calls and the transfers and the photographs and the empty nursery. Emma was home, and that was the only number that had ever mattered. Justice does not always arrive the way you imagine it will. It does not arrive in a single dramatic moment. It arrives slowly, in documents and courtrooms and the careful, patient work of people who believe that the truth, given enough structure, cannot be permanently buried. Emma is home now. She sleeps through the night. She eats full meals. She tells me about her friends and her books and the songs she learned in music class. She has her father's eyes and her own fierce, perceptive, unmovable heart. She is the reason I kept going when every part of me wanted to stop. And she was, from the very beginning, the one who cracked the whole thing open with 5 quiet words on a birthday morning. Never underestimate a child who is paying attention. If this story moved you, if you felt every turn of it, please subscribe to this channel and hit the bell icon so you never miss what comes next. Drop a comment below and tell me where in the world you are watching from and which part of this story hit you the hardest. The next story is already waiting for you, and I promise you, it is even more unbelievable than this one.